Anyway, they called back again a couple months later, and they wanted to have a real conversation. Okay, you want to do what? You want to think about what it would take to have a Chinese herb clinic at Cleveland Clinic. So that got my attention.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Qiological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. We don't need patient education. We need marketing. Good marketing at that. Seems to me, for the most part, patients don't care about understanding acupuncture. They just want to feel better. We limit ourselves by believing that patients have to or want to understand, or that we have to educate them into a point of view. Actually, no, we don't. What we need is to be unusually effective in our clinical work, and then patients will gossip about you to their family and friends. People like to learn, but I don't know anyone who likes getting, air quotes here, educated. Education is about the rational, but that is not what draws people to a practitioner. They are drawn by the reputation of being effective, personable, and caring. Don't imagine that your patients care about the beautiful holism of our medicine. While holism might be a selling point for a slice of the population, for the most part, what patients want is a solution to their problem that is reasonably priced. It's fine if you want to focus on the profound power of nature in the work we do, but don't push it on your patients. They're not that interested in your ideology or love of acupuncture. What they want to know is if you're a reliable practitioner who can help them, ideally without having to adopt your belief system. Don't get me wrong, I love acupuncture. It's just that I get uncomfortable around missionaries. So, let's talk for a moment about marketing. You've for sure experienced bad marketing, perhaps been unskilled and clumsy with it yourself. You know the feeling of marketing that comes at you in a way that has you looking for the exits. But do you know what good marketing feels like? It feels like getting help from someone who understands and cares about you. Good marketing feels like something you've been seeking is being offered to you. It feels like your lucky day, like you're not dealing with a salesperson, but instead a trustworthy advisor. This in part comes from the salesperson putting your needs above making the sale. This is not to say the person doing the selling isn't trying to sell their solutions. They are. It's just that they want to be sure that the solution is really the right one for you. Good marketing is knowing what you have on offer and what you don't. It's being happy to gently burst the illusions people have about acupuncture, because the goal is not to talk people into something they think they want, but rather help them have a clear-eyed sense of what's actually possible. Good marketing, it's more about being a trustworthy guide. It's not about making the sale because you've got an eye on your financial dashboard. It's about making sure there's a good fit so they don't waste their money and your time. Let me give you an example of how I was a trustworthy salesperson the other day. I had a woman call and want herbs for a fibroid. It's not small, and she's had it for a long time. She's in her 60s. That kind of excessive stagnation, especially given her age and that she doesn't have a period to help take the stagnant blood out of her body, I think she's better served by modern laparoscopic surgery. I'm in the business not just of selling acupuncture and herbs, but of promoting East Asian medicine as a reliable and trustworthy method. So, what I sold that day was not a few bags of herbs and a few acupuncture treatments, but rather the experience of showing someone that East Asian medicine practitioners are honest and reliably helpful. In this case, by saying from my experience and perspective, even though she wanted to avoid the surgery, I thought it might be the best way forward for her. And afterwards, to heal from that and prevent issues in the future, come see someone like me or you. That's good marketing. Good marketing, it builds trust. It puts the other person first because our job at the end of the day, it's to help people. Marketing, often enough, gets a bad rap. Seen as manipulative and somehow a bit dirty, but the truth is, a good headline that gets your attention, that's marketing. Having someone listen to you so that they know how to help you, that's a kind of marketing too. Can our attention be manipulated in ways that exert an undue influence? Yeah, of course, and that's worth being attentive to. Furthermore, worth making a study of, because in the world of acupuncture and East Asian medicine, we need to be able to get people's attention because while many people have heard about and use acupuncture, we're still a far way from being considered mainstream. In this history series conversation with Bill Egloff, we take a trip in the Wayback Machine and explore some of the early influences that set many of those early practitioners onto the path of learning acupuncture and herbal medicine, and how over the decades, we've seen how East Asian medicine has found its way into cutting-edge, mainstream clinics. Integration into the mainstream? It has opportunities and challenges. We'll be getting into all this in a moment, right after I share with you some clinical resources that you'll find helpful. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out the new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Stan. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Bill Egloff, welcome to Geological.
Good morning, Michael. Good to see you.
Yeah, you and I get to see each other. Of course, all y'all out there in radio land, you're just going to hear us because Geological is an audio experience. But these days, lots of people like video, but no video on Geological. We are old guys doing old school.
Believe it, old school.
Yeah, old school. That's why we're here today. This is another one of the history series that I've been doing, gosh, by the time this publishes, for over a year now.
Old geezer radio here.
It's old geezer radio. That's right. So, hey, Mr. Old Geezer, one of the things I'm really curious about is when you were not an old geezer, when you were just a young guy, like what on earth was going on in your life that you thought acupuncture, Chinese medicine, might be a good idea? I mean, when did you first hear about it? How old were you? What was going on? What was happening in your world?
Oh, Lordy. You said this wasn't going to be a therapy session, all right?
I never promised that. I don't think I've ever said it. It might be therapeutic. You're right. It's not a therapy session. Could be therapeutic. We'll see.
Here it is. Yeah, it's very interesting. Back in 1976, I had created a natural food store in America's hometown, Plymouth, Massachusetts. Some friends of ours were going to the first classes with Dr. So before it became New England School of Acupuncture, like Stuart Watts and Seneca Anderson. And my wife was always very interested in acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and it was all semi-interesting.
Now, wait a minute. Hang on a second. Natural food store, 1976, natural food store.
Yeah.
Okay, what sparked that?
I'd been running some food co-ops on Cape Cod for a couple of years. That's actually how my wife and I met, was at a food co-op meeting. She was very cooperative, and I had an interest in natural medicine, natural food, and when friends of ours came back from taking a few classes with Dr. So, it became more and more interesting. And then in 1981, we attended NISA, which turned out to be Dr. So's last class. And that's just trivia, along with people like Kara Frank and Sharon Weizenbaum and Andy Ellis. And then the glitterati of teachers from Dan Bensky, Andy Gamble, Ted Kapchuk, Kiko Matsumoto, Stephen Birch.
There was a lot going on back then. I mean, it was new. It was just an emerging thing, and yet it seems like something was coalescing in terms of teaching and learning.
Yeah. Well, it happened in Dr. So and a few people like Bill Prensky and Steve Rosenblatt could start the school in Boston because of the Massachusetts law that allowed for a physician to oversee any other therapy. And so the actual first clinic was out in Worcester, Mass., where my mother was born. This was before the renovations of the clinic in Boston. There was the macrobiotic movement that was going on since the very early 70s that we were involved with also. And there was a tie-in, obviously, with natural medicine and Chinese medicine. And anyway, I was sort of tiring of just being involved with a natural food business before Whole Foods, Bread and Circus had been developed in Brookline. And we both wanted to go to acupuncture school.
Yeah, one thing led to another.
Yeah. That was in January of 81. In June, my wife had a ectopic pregnancy, unknown. She almost died from blood loss. Obviously, a huge shock. And then she got acupuncture from Peter Velasquez, and that was helpful for a couple of days. And he said, you should go see Ted Kapchuk over on Quack Alley in Cambridge, Green Street.
Crack Alley?
Quack Alley.
So this was not a great part of town.
There was a lot of quacks, alternative medicine people.
Oh, Quack Alley. Okay, I thought you said Crack Alley. So I was like, no, Quack Alley. All right. So where all the weirdos were hanging out.
Yeah, color therapy and whatever else, And it was, Ted had another assistant named Jordan, and I forget his last name, but anyways, he recommended what turned out to be a version of Bujan Yishitang for her because she was having some prolapses and blood loss, and fill out this formula, go down to Chinatown in Boston. That was quite an experience.
Now, what was your first impression of that? Like, here's a formula, go down to Chinatown. And so what was that experience like back then?
Well, you're in a Chinese store that sold herbs. You had no idea what the herbs were. And it's very foreign, obviously, at many levels. So we got this formula. We brought it home. My wife cooked it. Our 4 young daughters thought it smelled like roadkill. Yeah.
I've never heard anyone describe it as roadkill. I like that.
Not that we cooked roadkill, but it was very effective quite quickly for my wife's energy. And then Ted recommended another formula, and we got it filled by a woman in Cambridge named the Muna, who had a lot of Chinese herbs in her home and whatever. That worked out fine. And but my wife's health regained so quickly in July and August that we went back to school in September, and she was her normal, robust health. And it was pretty remarkable to be experiencing from a near-death experience. Really got my attention. And this was when Nisa was, and everyone was saying, don't take Chinese herbs unless you know everything about it. There wasn't any teaching in 81, 82, 83 of herbs. And then 84, I started taking a 3-year herb program with Weidong Liu at Nisa, which was I was very, very curious. And it was very interesting. And I think I'm a diligent student trying to understand what was being presented. And so that was my first experience with really studying herbal medicine.
Yeah. Well, not just studying it, but having it come into your life, affect it in a very profound way. Help save your wife's life. Now, were you as interested in acupuncture, or was herbs the thing that really seemed to draw you in?
Herbs, what drew me in. We were raising 4 young daughters and going to acupuncture school in Boston. Yeah, doesn't everybody do that?
4 young daughters and going to acupuncture school. Most people these days barely have 1.3 children.
Yeah, who's crazy enough to do all this? But whatever, youthful curiosity and youthful folly, something, and I was very curious about it, so why not?
I like the way you say that. Youthful folly, youthful curiosity. Thank goodness that there's a bunch of stuff that we don't know when we're first starting out on something. I don't know about you. There's a bunch of stuff I would have never attempted had I known the trouble I was asking for.
For sure. I was born in St. Louis.
I know St. Louis.
I know.
Where'd you go to high school?
My parents moved back to Boston. My father was a physician and my mother was a nurse. So I was born in Barnes Hospital, but we didn't stay there very long. But it is the show me state. Don't forget that.
I don't know. And in fact, it's funny because while I grew up in St. Louis, I got the heck out of here when I was 18. I couldn't wait to leave. It's like, yeah, Missouri, blah, 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 show me state, blah, blah, blah. But I have lived actually much of my life with that show me attitude. Like, okay, I'm willing, I'm curious, but show me.
Yeah. Well, I went back to college at Washington University there.
Brought you back. It's a good school. What were you studying back in those days?
Architecture.
Architecture? Okay, you were studying architecture and you end up in the natural foods business.
Oh, yes. Oh, there was that other thing going on at the same time, the Vietnam War, right?
Yes.
that was throwing everybody, to say the least, throwing for a loop that changed a lot. And what's people's value in the world? Anyway, we said we're not getting into therapy here, right? So we don't want to go too far.
Okay, well, hang on. I'm not interested in therapy. I'm an acupuncturist. Why would I want to do therapy? I mean, actually, I'm not. I mean, one of the wonderful things about practicing acupuncture, as far as I can tell, is we can help people with psychoemotive issues without having to do therapy, so to speak. It's amazing how people can re-regulate themselves without a whole lot of yakety yak, yak, yak. Just to come back to it for a moment, Vietnam War. It sounds like it was an influence for you. I know it was an influence for me as a high school student. I felt like I was looking down the barrel of a gun, knowing when I turned 18, I got to deal with this. The draft ended 2 months before I turned 18. So I kind of got a pass on it, but you didn't. So how did that influence what you were doing?
The whole time was very traumatic. And it was a time of depression for me at some level of how do I cope with, given my number, I was going to be drafted, but I got a deferment because of being depressed. I couldn't go forward into being drafted. But how that impacted, being in college and staying focused or lack of focus in college was very difficult for me. Anyway, we moved on, and I can't say there's any direct link between architecture and Chinese medicine or natural foods and necessarily. But the other aspect about St. Louis was where Yogi Berra lived on the hill. And as he always said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Right?
Amen, brother.
So isn't life at some level, a sequence of coming up against forks in the road and moving forward?
Absolutely. The thing to me that's so amazing, sometimes incredibly non-continuous, like how do you get from A to B at times? Sometimes things just show up, or an idea shows up, or somebody shows up. And the world can pivot and change very, very quickly, right before our very eyes.
Serendipity, the universe. Let's sort of like moving forward into 1985. My wife had a friendship with Joanne Cavatora around the I Ching and Tarot, and they had Joanne and Jean Cavatora had Hingham Grain and Spice up around Boston, and he had been working for a short time with Kevin Cronick in Santa Cruz, who was the national sales manager for his brother, Jeff Cronick, Oro Trading, and they were distributing dragon eggs from East Earth Herb in Eugene, Oregon.
Wait a minute, dragon eggs.
Dragon eggs was a product line developed by the infamous Bill Brevoort.
Wait, hang on a second. What are these dragon eggs?
Dragon eggs was a line of Chinese herb formulas. I think there were 6 formulas, and they were very specific towards different organ patterns.
And this is the mid-'80s?
Yeah, this is probably 84, I would guess.
Okay. Where did these guys learn their Chinese medicine? Where'd they get it?
Bill and Peggy, who had been living with their kids in a trailer out by the coast, had been importing high-quality ginseng, I think the mid-'70s. I don't know where his education came from. He was a practicing Buddhist and Tibetan Buddhist, and I don't really understand his background, but the development of that line was semi-interesting. And Jean Cavator didn't understand talking with other acupuncturists in the greater New England, Boston area. And he said, Bill had been going to acupuncture school at NISA, maybe, and we had a natural food store. Maybe I would like to bring this product line out. And there's
some connections.
But yeah, thanks. It's the serendipity of the I Ching, I think, brought us together. But it was really talking with Jean, and then Kevin Cronick was with Bill Brevoort, because Bill and Peggy had been working with Ted Kapchuk in the development of this product line called Jade Pharmacy after Ted came back from Macau and all. When I heard that Ted's name was going to be, this product line was coming out fairly soon in 86, and obviously with Ted's Web That Has No Weaver book and his teaching, and that maybe there would be a real interest and opportunity there to work with them That's how you make decisions, right?
It makes sense to me that you kind of follow along, you see where the energy is. It's like you notice things. I mean, I think this in some ways, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the essence of what makes some people entrepreneurial. They have a feel for something. They're tapped into something. They notice connections where other people don't notice connections. They notice possibilities where other people aren't even looking, and connect dots that anyone in retrospect could connect, but connecting the dots forward, that's a different kind of thing. Sounds like you had your finger on that pulse. No pun intended.
Yeah, right. And the serendipity of communication about it was, sure, in retrospect, that was a very unique opportunity. I was losing interest in the development of the natural food store and the kind of relationships with customers. So I was going to see if this was going to be an opportunity that made sense.
Did you see the natural foods industry changing at that point?
Yeah, sure.
There was. But how was it changing?
I mean, you have to really scale up to a larger size, and being in Plymouth, Massachusetts, it was ahead of its time for sure. That's the best way of saying it. And Bread and Circus had developed in Brookline, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life doing retail. I didn't see myself doing that. The relationships between customers and about what they were looking for in creating their own health, being responsible for their own health was a whole lot more interesting for me than just the retail business.
It's curious, isn't it, how sometimes there'll be something that gets your attention, it gets you started down a path, almost like rocket ships, right? Like that first stage of a rocket, it'll get you away from gravity. And then there's that second stage of a rocket that takes you even further. And it seems like often enough in life, similar things. Something will put you on a trajectory, not because you're going to do it forever, but because it's going to get you to the next inflection point where something comes along. So you doubled down on herbs.
And having 4 young children.
Good God, your wife was busy.
I had adopted the 4 girls at a young age.
Okay. Wow, there's a story.
Well, that's for another podcast. Right.
Yes. Not Con Herbs, Jade Pharmacy.
Jade Pharmacy, yeah. People had a real interest in it and starting to hear about the quality that East Earth Herb was putting into these extracts and tablets. There were water decocted, alcohol and water concentrated extracts, liquid extracts, and also making tablets out of that too, which was very, very unique at that time.
So who was it? Tell me again, who was it behind Jade Pharmacy?
Well, Ted was the formulator. Bill Bevort and Peggy Bevort and Charlie owned East Earth Herb in Eugene. They had brought the manufacturing into Eugene from the coast.
Okay, and these guys were doing these water extractions?
Water and alcohol extracted concentrate.
So that's pretty interesting. Early on, I mean, that's some technology there. That's some serious chemistry.
It was in a closed loop system to really capture all the essential oils and as to super concentrate, the essence of the herbal formulas. Yeah, and there were the Dragon Eggs formulas, what you'd say would be much more focused on a specific pattern. Let's say with Green Tiger was for a real stagnant liver chi. It's a colder formula, as opposed to Jade Pharmacy formulas that were much more balanced. You could see in the antecedent formulas that Ted based them on. You could talk about the development of them, why they were put together, and people resonated with them. The rest is history on that. It was coming together very nicely.
When does Crane Herbs show up on the scene?
I had created an S-Corp for Crane Herb in January of 1986. So Kevin Cronick was distributing on the West Coast, essentially, and we were distributing essentially on the East Coast. This is how we and this was before he created Con Herb Company. Kevin had wanted to develop the company more as a marketing company, essentially. Business always starts getting involved with money and lawsuits, and problems get created. And essentially, Ted decided to work with Kevin Cronick with the Jade Pharmacy line and left East Earth Herb in something like 1991. And that's as much as I want to really get into it.
Well, it's always interesting to me. I think quite often, unless you're a malicious, manipulative person, there's a small part of the population that's like that. But mostly people are looking to do something helpful and good and make a livelihood and ideally be of service to others, because that's just good business. If you're helpful and useful, that's a great business plan. And people want to do business with you. And that's not a bad way to go through the day, support your family and yourself and your community. But man, again, you start down a path and this looks like a good idea. And then here's the next thing. And then the next thing you know, wow, this is different than I thought, right? You start off in natural foods. Yeah, this is great. I'm going to help people. Oh, natural foods, maybe not.
Throw in cocaine, throw in lawsuits, things change.
And marital infidelity, maybe.
Well, we can get into all that. And it was difficult for Kevin. I'll leave it at that. Kevin died in, 1991, 92. His father called me and wanted to know if I wanted to buy the remnants of the company. That was more than I wanted to get involved with. Kevin, he'd wanted to go in on he called me in the late 80s to go in on a hostile takeover of East Earth Herb while this lawsuit was going on. I didn't want to get involved with that kind of relationship at all. And so anyway, I didn't buy the remnants of Con. There was a lot of debt still left over from
the business side can be challenging.
They pulled it together. Lee Scrollier, the Robert and Andrew Miller, Ephraim and Harriet. There were 23 owners of Con at that. They were created to move Con forward.
23 owners?
Yeah.
It's hard enough to work with just one partner.
Yeah. Well, anyway, they did Zev was involved with it in developing his own line of alembic herbs. And all these people wanted to have their own separate product lines, which was great as teachers and budding entrepreneurs. So
it's good to be a budding entrepreneur. And this is one of the things that I love about, well, not just practicing medicine, but trying to do something in the world that's worthwhile. It's like trying to figure out what your ballywhack is. What's your domain? How far can I go with it? And what can I do to be helpful?
So these were the early 90s.
And it was a little bit raucous.
There was an industry that was developing. Dietary supplements were growing, people in many ways, and this very interesting time. So the health freedom movement was really making gains.
Women, health freedom movement. I don't think I've heard of that.
You're too young.
Well, exactly. It's worth talking to you.
Right. Well, people were wanting to be in charge of their own health and have available the dietary supplements that they wanted to be taking, herbs that they wanted to be taking. They wanted Bach remedies and their homeopathics, and this was coming up against obviously the regulatory structure of the FDA. If there are problems with various quality control issues. In 92, you had. See, I am old. It was great to be able to.
When did you figure that out?
So, listen up here, children. Here. So, in the very early 90s, might have been 1989, in Belgium, there was the Belgian slimming formula that was created.
Oh, yes.
Now you're remembering, right?
Well, I remember this because I went to acupuncture school in the mid-90s. This was right about the time that whole thing came out. For all y'alls that weren't there, I was just barely there. So tell us about the slimming formula, because that turned out to be a cluster.
Well, yeah. And who got blamed for it?
Those Chinese medicine people, those wackos with Chinese medicine.
Yeah, well, it was created by some untrained MDs, and they had the wrong substitution for the herb, and the herb part of it that was put into this formula had a fair amount of aristolochic acid. So, but they also combine it with dexfenfluramine, diethylpropion, which is like an amphetamine. They combined it with diamox, meprobamate, and this whole cocktail killed people and really destroyed a number of kidneys of patients. And who got blamed and what got blamed for it? It was the Chinese herb port. There was the wrong substitution by ignorant herb company. But this got a lot of press, obviously. I don't have the statistics on how many people really lost kidneys, a lot. And some women in Britain died from this. So you're getting quality control issues. You're getting problems with like Jinbuwan and its relationship with hepatitis. PC Spes, which was for prostate cancer, but that was adulterated with other drugs, other pharmaceuticals. Issues of quality control was really becoming quite pronounced. And what's the FDA going to be doing about it? Anyway, ultimately, with the help of a lot of people in the U.S. Congress, from Senator Kennedy and Hatch and Harkin, and a lot of other legislators, people like Lauren Israelson and Mark Blumenthal really brought people in the industry together with Congress to help to create DSHEA, the Dietary Safety, Health, and Education Act of 1994.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. So this was kind of a watershed moment. In the early days, it's always the wild, wild west. Hey, we got something, and, people looking to make money and establish a business and domain and a name and all that, and that's the way us humans work. But then we have this watershed moment with the slimming formula, which is an unholy concoction of pharmaceuticals along with Chinese herbs, and the wrong Chinese herbs being used because, they weren't trained. And that brings about this moment that you're talking about here with Congress and the FDA, where, okay, we need some regulation of this industry. We got to figure this out.
But it was to try to incorporate, as I hear it, to try to incorporate a subset, a very small subset of herbal medicine for state licensed practitioners. It was a challenge too great, including into DSHEA. The gray area, there was the unenforced perspective from FDA about herbal medicine and acupuncturists and Chinese herbs. It couldn't get incorporated into that legislation. You ought to really, at some point, talk with people like Lauren Israelson, Michael McGuffin from APA, the executive director of APA for many years. That's a very interesting story. But it's the development of this herb industry, this herb trade, and the need for quality control, really understanding what companies are doing, what's happening with adulteration, what's happening with these Chinese herbs, what's happening with amphetamines. Oh yeah, they were using ephedra, mahuang, to create amphetamines. So I don't want, the issue of mahuang is obviously very critical and like what happened to it. Let me suffice to say, that the dietary supplement industry, the weight loss and the sports enhancement companies created the problem of people getting ill and some people dying. They had high concentrations of total ephedrine alkaloids, high concentrations, high doses, and combining with high levels of caffeine, high doses, including other stimulants. And of course, you're going to have problems with people and people who want to take more, like the sports people want to take more.
Or just people who like getting kind of high, like, ooh, this is good. Let's have some more. Hey, guess what? It's legal too. I can get it down this street.
Sure. And in 1998, FDA said, we think a good level for total ephedrine alkaloids would be 24 milligrams per day total, which was a great level. And the industry should have accepted it. But no, the dietary supplement industry said, no, we don't want to be encumbered by this. We like our business with weight loss and sports enhancement. So we're not going to accept the FDA level. There were not the problems being created by licensed TCM practitioners prescribing Ma Huang, but this was, going on from 98, 99. More problems were coming up. FDA was seeing all these adverse events coming up. Steve Beckler, for the Baltimore pitcher, died. He is overweight and getting into and trying to get in training and, took too much. But then obviously amphetamines being created by ephedra also got the hysteria of why keep ephedra Ma Huang on the market. And so it was banned in 2004. We're now 20 years from 2004. And I think that's don't lose sight of why Ma Huang was lost. Anyway, just recently, APA, the American Herbal Product Association, the trade association for herbal herbs in the U.S., they created a great video documentary of Deshay from the 1994. That's 30 years from when it was created. Anyway, it gets into a lot of very interesting areas of history and people and why it was created back then. But I think the same kind of video should be created to explain, have people not lose sight for how Ma Huang was lost. But in this mid-90s area, for me, it was with starting to care other product lines, make them available from health concerns to Blue Poppy, from Bob Flaw's, John Scott's Golden Flower, Chinese herbs, developing companies and making them available was to practitioners was really, we were at a point to be able to help support the development and distribution for that. At that point, Oriental Medical Supplies, Tom Romaki's company, was only distributing medical devices and needles. Getting access, especially on the whole East Coast, with Chinese herbs was the service that we were providing at that point. Really what I was starting to see was practitioners were just prescribing formulas that they had on their shelf, very general formulas. They weren't really thinking about what was wanted and needed by the patients, not really thinking what is the right herb formula or the best delivery system for patients. So my curiosity continued to want to then create a service to have a custom prescriptions made available and how to help practitioners have access to it.
In a sense, that's the core of the medicine, that we're creating something specific for a unique individual at a moment in time. Look, a month from now, hopefully they're going to be on a different formula because they'll be different.
And how do you actually have that? Are you going to compound it in your own clinic? Are you going to be your own mom and pop pharmacy?
I used to have a wall of herbs, and I loved it. It was cool.
Yeah, right.
And it allowed me to put together anything I needed for people. Of course, now they've got to take it home and smell that delicious roadkill smell. So, that was a bit of a challenge. But let me tell you something. Over the years, in the beginning, I loved having my hands on herbs. Still do, actually. Keeping up a raw herb pharmacy is a big job. It's not small. It's big. And especially as you get busier as a practitioner, it's like a half-time job.
It is. It is a separate job. And you have enough going on with patients and really understanding what is wanted and needed at any time for them. So how to really be able to create a service that was practical and functional is what grabbed my attention. My wife and I were in Montalcino in Italy for a week, and it was one of those dreams. So yeah, it makes the most sense. So I want to create a Chinese herb custom pharmacy online. I mean, this has been the development of computers and then software and the internet. We're all growing through this whole process of learning about what do you mean by software? Well, what does it really do? We got involved just by serendipity that with getting involved with a French relational database called Fourth Dimension that allowed you to really think in terms of integrating, making connections between all different fields of information.
Fourth dimension.
Fourth dimension.
I remember that. That was a database that came in that like blew the tops of database persons' heads off, because it was this like multi-relational database. Nobody's seen anything like that before. I mean, these days we have data mining and all kinds of things, but back in that day, that was a tool that opened up possibilities that previously did not exist.
And how to think about information, different fields of information, and make connections. That really, I had a real affinity for that.
Now, did you program that yourself?
No. But in terms of organization of material, organization of Chinese herbal and Chinese herb formula information, that really resonated with me. And, I entered all that stuff myself because I was crazy,
A little crazy is helpful, but there's also that thing about scratching our own itch, right? Like, I want to know this, I want to learn it. So I'm going to build this system, partly so I understand it better, and also hopefully it will be useful to somebody else.
Sure. Well, I think maybe underlying all of this is, being the son of a medical doctor and nurse, and I wanted to be involved with Chinese medicine and be respected. I wanted to have a product, a service that would have integrity, that would be professionally accepted by you can look at it and it's not like a bunch of either raw herbs in a Ziploc bag or just powder in a baggie, product for practitioners that would be professionally manufactured and blended, and the labeling would have all the information on it and would have the integrity that I could be proud of. And so working with some software developers who happened to be across the street from me in Mashpee, Massachusetts.
Good God. You and your serendipity.
Exactly. It's not like I was looking in the Boston area for developer and with Fourth Dimension, and everyone said, go find Susan Gordon. Well, where's Susan Gordon? Susan Gordon was running her father's business across the street from me in Mashpee. That whole being told by her, if I can think it up, she can create it. If I can think it up, she can create it. And that was very freeing for me. And being able to, then work with her, and then Ben Ferber, who became her partner, and a couple of years later, that's a very freeing place to be. And, I was fortunate enough to be able to have enough available money with the business to be putting into the development of this software, into the development of the website.
Now you just said website. So again, all you kids out there, you've always had a website. I'm thinking about when you first started your journey with Chinese medicine back in the 70s and 80s. There was no such thing as a website. The software was something that ran on great big mainframe computers. There was a whole technology that was co-evolving that would allow people like you to have an idea, and someone else could be like, well, yeah, I can make that into a digital thing that connects people. It makes me wonder, and I hadn't thought about this, but it makes me wonder how much of the growth of our industry is also intimately tied in with technology, the advances in communication that arose in the 80s and 90s. Mind-blowing to anyone who grew up in the 70s, because that stuff didn't exist previously, and now all of a sudden the world's interconnected in a way that it had never been interconnected before.
Yeah. I'm an Earth Ox, a Libra Earth Ox. I'm a little slow.
But you're steady. You're slow and steady.
Yes. What is this internet thing? God, these kids come up with now and stuff. So anyway, yeah, I finally got it. I got it big time, and it was very interesting. And so how do you create a system that's going to meet the regulations for FDA and U.S. Pharmacopoeia? I hired Cindy Beener, who was a natural products inspector and consultant, to really look at all the details around all the regulations for good manufacturing practices, all the master control documents, standard operating procedures. How do you blend all these different concentrated granules, and we were using, and have only used KPC for a lot of different reasons. But how do you blend all these concentrated granules with different weight and different densities? So we got a turbula from Switzerland that is a lab equipment for blending all different various types of ingredients, from the explosive industry to like the cosmetics industry to the pharmaceutical industry. And a company down in New Jersey had this turbula. They're like the better part of $30,000. But how do you really show people that you're blending all these ingredients so that every dosage is equally the same? How do you deal with the issues the FDA has to come up with like looking at small amounts of pharmaceuticals in a bigger blend of different medium to go into a tablet or capsule, and they use this equipment. I said, sure, I'll spend $30,000 on getting this thing in to really be able to show that you can like blend all this various ingredients into a dosage and be consistent.
Yes, consistent dosage. That's a big deal in our industry.
Yeah, it is. So that was, 2004 at the beginning of it. And then when I started it, and it was working fine. It always has been working fine. But I think back about people started using it, and then the story for me gets to be the fork in the road starts to happen in 2012 when I hear from people at Cleveland Clinic.
Another fork, is it the fork or another fork? Sounds like you've already had a few forks, my friend.
I know, man.
So Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah, what happened? I mean, this is a very interesting story that I want to be able to teach more about. I wish Cleveland would get out and like really talk about their whole model. But until then, I'm going to say as much as I can, as I'm allowed to within this confidentiality agreements and stuff. But essentially, you're looking at, they had an acupuncture clinic working successfully. Dr. Tanya Edwards, medical doctor, been working at Cleveland for well over 20 years. She was the one who created that, along with Jamie Starkey. And Jamie was half Korean. She grew up in Ohio. Her grandmother would be cooking herbs for her. She had been working at Cleveland for a while too. But it's a very interesting, like, what is the development of that program? Like, who has the gall? An herb clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. It's a remarkable story. They had changed the laws, the regulations within Ohio a couple of years before that, and Cleveland had been the one had put their political muscle behind getting that.
Okay, so hang on a second. Cleveland Clinic is famous. Cleveland, Ohio, like, all right, middle of Ohio, Rust Belt, USA. All right, people on the coast can easily write that kind of thing off. But like, what inspired them to want to do this?
Excellent question, Michael. You're great at questions.
Well, I'm just, I'm troublesome that way.
Okay, my take on it is it's a very entrepreneurial system of hospitals, of cardiologists. Toby Cosgrove was the CEO. Michael Roizen was the head of the wellness. I think that's what they called it at that time. And he had a major name nationally. Friends with Dr. Oz. They wanted to not just project Cleveland Clinic as a hospital for surgery and pharmaceuticals. But they really saw, Toby Cosgrove, I think, was the main person, was really wanted to offer preventive and wellness medicine, expand beyond. And this is, Roizen was probably maybe he's the major guy behind all this at that time. And you had like Tanya Edwards, a black woman who had created the acupuncture clinic, used her political capital within Cleveland Clinic, along with Jamie Starkey. Why exactly did they want to offer herbal medicine at Cleveland Clinic? It's a combination of people and the administration. And so now what do you do? Okay, so I got a call early 2012 from somebody from Cleveland Clinic. And dealing with hospitals at that time was a pain in the ass because they would never pay their bills. You got to follow up on them, and this was with needles and stuff. So I could care less. So anyway, I never returned that call. This was from some buyer.
Hospital, pain in the butt. I'm not talking to these guys.
What's in it for me? Anyway, they called back again a couple months later, and they wanted to have a real conversation. And okay, you want to do what? You want to think about what it would take to have a Chinese herb clinic at Cleveland Clinic. So that got my attention. And okay, this sounds more serious. So now how do you really talk about it?
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi. And that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
Well, luckily you've got a machine, so we know that you've got some skill in this domain.
So some other people knew about the custom prescriptions that we were doing. So I went out to Cleveland with Shelley Rosen, who was an acupuncturist, had been doing some work with us in writing, and acupuncturists from Albuquerque and Austin. But it was really when talking with the committee of people who were pharmacists, people who were looking at quality standards for different supplements that they were bringing in, vitamins and things, and talking to them about the quality that the herbs we used in our custom prescriptions were from KPC. They were one of 2 companies in the world that met the pharmaceutical inspection scheme, PIC-S. No companies from mainland China met those requirements. But how do you talk about quality that certifies every aspect about how the product was manufactured and tested? It was a big deal. Some of the pharmacists had known about that, PIC-S. It so resonated enough with them that this was something more serious to really consider. How does Crane do their compounding? Our system was to prove to 1/10 of a gram what went into each formula. Integrating basic technology of, scales and software. It is relatively rudimentary, but it was if you use a jeweler's scale and technology, you can really prove what you put back into it. And that brought up a lot of other issues about before barcodes were on products and stuff. We created that. Separate barcodes on each of the products to be able to simplify the compounding formula process.
That is the earth ox in you, isn't it?
You bet. Yeah, I'm very good at details, as it turns out. So the conversation about, and this was back in 2013 with Cleveland, the need to be able to they didn't want to have any herb pharmacy in any of their hospitals, in their spaces. You have to hire people, you have to have space, outsource it. Outsource it made every sense to them. How do I prove what we put into it met all their standards? We were not integrating with their patient information on any of their databases, anything like that. We weren't creating any problem with PHI, personal health information. That's obviously a very big deal. All the HIPAA issues. So outsourcing made every sense. And so what was interesting on their end was really creating the protocols for who should be. Well, first of all the protocols are very interesting. It was just MD referral at that time. How do people how do you find out that Cleveland Clinic has an herb clinic. The issues of like who are appropriate patients, you couldn't be having more than 5 pharmaceuticals at the same time. Patients had to be over 12 years old, had to not be on any blood thinners, and not actively being treated for cancer. The protocols were very good to be, doing a complete blood workup at a baseline at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, to really be looking at like what's happening with the blood levels with Chinese herbs.
What a great opportunity to mine some data on that.
Yeah, safety was the bottom line, gave them the security in terms of risk and working with patients. And they gave the person who was hired to be the herbalist was Galina Rufner, the Russian woman from Florida. You heard me say it right, Galina, right? She had a lot of background in Western medicine and understanding enough about pharmaceuticals and interactions between herbs and drugs, being able to communicate with other Western physicians. She was hired. Moved from Florida to Cleveland. Oh, what a glorious move.
Well, to work on a project of this magnitude and innovation, why wouldn't you move? I mean, yeah, it's nice to live in places that we like, but the opportunity to do work that really calls to our heart, I mean, why wouldn't you travel across the country or maybe to a different country to have an opportunity to participate?
In the creation of this remarkable new model. And the model was, you've got 30 minutes for your herb patient. For the initial treatment, for initial visit, it was like an hour. But taking all the information down, having to enter as much information as possible into Epic. You had to do the whole diagnosis, treatment plan, formula, design in 30 minutes. I said 30 minutes. It was crazy for them, and that's what their model still is. And so she was the person who could really do all this work and be seeing patients and, all the rest of it. That was working out well. We had and there is the 2-year herb safety study that looks at all the formulas, all the prescriptions, and they only use custom prescriptions. We don't have the time to get in. I'd love to have a separate podcast just on the Cleveland Clinic model, but I think it has great value in understanding it. The 2-year herb safety study, we went through their whole IRB process, looking at, adverse events, and out of whatever 1,245 custom prescriptions over 2 years, there were only 3 temporary minor adverse events of anxiety, pruritus, and insomnia, I think it was. Proved it to be a very safe medicine, custom prescription medicine, with patients taking up to 5 pharmaceuticals at the same time. Anyway, that's a great document, and I should send it to you to put up on your platform. But what happened after that was that the major things happening was that then Cleveland Clinic got involved with Dr. Mark Hyman, the functional medicine guru. They wanted to create the functional medicine department. And great, the problem with it is that with the medical doctors at Cleveland, working in the wellness department, they didn't know enough how to really feel comfortable referring patients to the Chinese herb clinic. It was much easier for them to refer patients over to the functional medicine department with Mark Hyman.
Yeah, it makes more sense to them. Their brain works that way already.
Well, that really reduced the patient load coming into the Chinese herb clinic. But anyway, that's a major shift. But still, so we started with them in January of 2014, and that's still continuing. It's a great model to understand for all these other hospitals that talk about wanting to, at least the acupuncturists in these hospitals talk about wanting to bring herbs into their clinics.
Are there other hospitals that are doing this, or is it just Cleveland at this point? Because it sounds like they have a very workable model.
At this level, these are custom prescriptions. The Alina system up in Minneapolis, so there are 25 acupuncturists in that system. But they're mainly prescribing. When they do prescribe, they don't prescribe all that much, but they prescribe products, Chinese herb products. And sometimes lately they've been doing customs, but nothing like what Cleveland Clinic has been doing.
And it sounds like Cleveland Clinic has really sort of gone full in on the way that you and I as herbalists would think about using Chinese medicine in the first place, which is, what does this person need at this time and what amount? We don't really think about, oh, here's a product off the shelf and it kind of fits you. So it's very interesting that Cleveland took this approach. I mean, it's a very Chinese medicine way of thinking about it.
Absolutely. There's a lot more to talk about how that communication between TCM practitioners and Western physicians and the hospital and all the legal and liability issues, how all that has played a part, how the marketing of that is as a part of it. So from there, Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York contacted us. Jun Mao, Dr. Mao has been very innovative and wanted to really help support their cancer patients with Chinese herbs. How do you start really talking about, within a major cancer hospital, how do you start talking about all the issues about quality control, all the other separate relationship between, Crane and Memorial? But that's a great program. But it's bottom line, you're looking at, I think, 7 formulas that they're using for the side effects of chemotherapy and radiation. It's very successful, and the great challenges for them to try to bring greater respect and understanding about what is actually happening with the efficacy of these formulas with their patients, and ultimately they talk about having them made in-house. I think that's never going to happen for a long time.
Well, it's, like we were talking earlier, you bring it in-house, you're bringing in a whole lot of complexity. Why not outsource it to people that have already been doing this for a long time? Look, you started off with natural foods. Your path has led you through serendipity and opportunity and difficulties at times into having a company that knows something about herbs, knows something about the medicine, and combined with good manufacturing practices, you can be consistent. You can be wickedly consistent in what you're able to produce. There's a kind of institutional knowledge that you have because you've worked through the problems. And being an Earthhawks didn't hurt you in that. It was really helpful. Give you the opportunity to create something that actually quite precise. So, maybe they could take and clone you into a hospital. Why not just work cooperatively with a system that's already up there? This is like the beauty, I think, in many ways, of the world that we live in. Very connected via the internet and all the wonderful tools we have. You don't have to bring things in-house. You can source what you need from reliable partners. That idea didn't even exist 40 years ago.
Correct. Well, the challenge is, so what they and other Western clinicians and researchers need to do is create clinical trials. And so the clinical trial for Memorial is really looking at Maziran-1 for constipation. How do you prove it? Do a clinical trial. Now we're coming up against what you wanted me to talk a little bit about what's happening into the future. But the challenge right now to do a clinical trial is for the FDA, you have to meet their IND, their investigational new drug requirements. So for every herb in a formula that you want to be trialing, double blind and all, you've got to provide all this information on all the levels of toxicity and interactions and blah, blah, blah. And it's very cumbersome and expensive, and no one can do it. Lisa Conboy is doing something at Mass College of Pharmacy, with NISA and all, with some students with collecting some, maybe 60 herbs. For trials to happen, you've got to meet also requirements, not just for NIH, but for FDA. So what's very interesting right now is this proposal last year from FDA to provide a exemption for this IND requirement for certain clinical trials. We're all waiting for that, hopefully, the FDA to come forward and say, yes, for certain clinical trials that are not meant for trialing some finished product for commercial use later on, we don't need to have this requirement be fulfilled for INDs. So hopefully, how do you actually physically, not physically, but how do you actually practically get a clinical trial created with Chinese herbs? Right now it's impeding other hospitals like Dartmouth Hitchcock for doing their own trial. So we have those challenges for meet the regulatory requirements. We certainly wish that like the NCCIH and Dr. Langevin and their team would want to support, an IND library so that other researchers could really utilize this information. It wouldn't have to be like recreating the wheel of information for every research project. But no, they're not providing that kind of support.
It almost sounds like that's something that would have to come from our side.
But there's no money in it.
Would that be something that doctoral students could work on as part of their education?
I don't think practically. Good luck. I don't know. Because it has to be like a database that would have to be, first of all, who's going to house the platform? Who's going to have access to it? How all the practical aspects of running it? It needs to be updated all the time. Who's going to do that is a big cumbersome problem.
Yeah. Infrastructure is a big deal.
No, there are financial reasons for the herb industry and for APA and the rest of the Natural Product Association companies to help how do you support clinical trials? They could help support a platform for these INDs to be housed, this research information. Because the more that herbal medicine is really trialed, it's going to help support the greater sales of the dietary supplement industry and then the greater herb industry. Providing real clinical information is only supportive of everybody. So how do you combine business interests with the future of herbal medicine? And so that, before we run off here too quickly, the challenges certainly are going to be coming up are the climate change issues with how herbs are going to be changing. Their medicinal benefits are changing. The sourcing of them is going to be more and more a constant problem. So all the supply chain issues are becoming more problematic, as we know, including the Panama Canal issues right now with preventing ships coming through. We've got issues, with not just FDA and how do they look at our particular small area of herbal medicine prescribed by state licensed practitioners. That's whole area. The issues are integrative medicine standards in hospitals. How do they start to look at and incorporate herbal medicine? Who are the providers? What are the qualifications for accrediting these providers? We've got problems with acupuncture schools being able to stay in business.
Yes, exactly. Acupuncture schools staying in business is a big issue right now.
Well, for sure. And we've got problems with the accrediting, ACAM, they accredit acupuncture colleges to create their own standards for herbal compounding. That makes no sense to have every school have their own separate standard. There should be a national standard, because there are certainly issues going from state to state and reciprocity.
Yes. Well, you know what we used to say in the tech industry back in the 80s. That's when I was a part of it. It's standards are great. It's great to have a bunch of standards because, more is better. Well, actually, that's not true at all. You want a standard so everybody is using a common platform, a common language. You don't need to recreate the wheel every time. But this to me is one of the real challenges with our industry. Because on one hand, when I hear about standards, I put my middle finger up because I'm just that kind of a guy. I'm going to do my own thing. One of the great things about practicing Chinese medicine, you can kind of do your own thing. What kind of prescription am I going to use? Well, I'm going to make something custom for this patient. I like not having 3 things that I'm allowed to use. I want to be able to pull from the whole pharmacopoeia. So on one hand, I love being able to do a very individualized medicine. On the other hand, you really do need a certain level of standards if you want to play at a higher level of society. Now, how we square that round hole, I don't know. You brought up a bunch of great questions that probably folks in our generation aren't going to answer, but the younger people will.
Keeping medical records for Chinese medicine patients. How can you do that realistically and practically? And they're required. Again, these are state licensed medical providers. It's not like amateur herbalists. There are requirements. And anyway, medical records are certainly need to be kept appropriately, and there's got to be like a tech solution for that. I wish Jane would be involved somehow. They seem to be moving ahead on their platform. At the same time, we have so many great opportunities of patients wanting to have acupuncture and herbal medicine, whether it's happening at the VA or we're looking at the issues of how Medicare can really help support the health of seniors. There are great opportunities and needs for the medicine to be offered. I think we need to not lose sight of the fact that, we provide a great service, keep growing forward. We're going to keep coming to more forks in the road and
taking them.
Yeah. And maybe one last thing, we're looking at WHO's, the ICD-11, the integration of all the Chinese herbal medicine patterns for uniform record keeping. There's a lot to talk about, Michael. We need to be moving towards, and that's what I'm looking at, is like, how do we integrate those kind of record keeping into our whole system to make it more seamless in terms of herbal prescribing and herbal record keeping?
It's a great question, Bill. It's a potent question, because again, on one hand, you've got the whole customization that Chinese medicine is based on. On the other side of it, there's a certain kind of standardization that our world is asking for, and there's a place for it. How you make those two very different influences come together, well, lucky for us, we practice Chinese medicine, East Asian medicine, Oriental medicine, whatever you want to call it these days. Whatever that medicine is we call. There's that idea of yin and yang. There's this idea that things change from one to the other. There are apparent opposites that are actually bespeaking a greater unity. How we can keep our eye on that and work with that, I suspect that's partly what takes us forward. And also looking at what is apparently a problem and recognizing it's also an opportunity.
For sure, it is. And that's what keeps me curious. What I'm going to be, what am I going to be doing? I'm only 74. Jeez, come on.
Wow. Okay. Well, this has been delightful. I love being able to start in the past like we did. What are the influences that got you started? And then also weaving it along into what you're doing in the present moment. Look, the past is the path we walk to get to where we are. It's so fortunate to have something that keeps your attention, has kept your attention for a lifetime. How lucky is that?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate in many ways. And where is it going? What are we going to do with the business after me? How sustainable is it?
It's a great question, and probably for a different conversation, but that question of what comes next, that is important.
Exactly.
All right. We'll leave it with a question then.
Thanks for the opportunity, Michael.
It's been a delight.
Yeah. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
Me too.
Take care.
I've heard it said that before tearing down a fence, it's best to know why that fence was built in the first place. Change, simply because it makes the present moment more convenient, that can lead to some troubles if you don't know the history of the local terrain. I enjoy conversations like this one with Bill because it gives me a glimpse of the natural history of the landscape that I all too easily take for granted. So often, there's a hidden complexity that supports my practice, like the proverbial fish in water. it's not so easy to recognize that within which we swim. Bill's attention to supply chains and government regulations, that is a complexity that's invisible to me, in part because people like him have paid attention to it, and it's now part of the business infrastructure that's invisible unless you're the one that's getting your hands dirty with it. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.